Welcome to the Wheels for All podcast, Roll On. Wheels for All is a student led nonprofit organization that has donated hundreds of bikes to low income families as part of our mission to provide free and reliable transportation for everyone. For our sixth episode, we are here with former R&D chief from GM and current business advisor with Waymo, Mr. Lawrence Burns. So without any further delay, let's jump right into it. Welcome, Mr. Burns, to our podcast. It's
Thank you
quite
very
an honor to have you here. And after digging into your career and history, we realize we have an abundance of facts and stories to unpack. Let's start with the basics. So, my colleague and I have spent a few hours digging into your website, lawrencedburns.org, and your publication, Autonomy, the Quest to Build the Driverless Car, and how it will reshape our world. But from your perspective, what does it mean to be Lawrence D. Burns, PhD?
What does it mean to be Lawrence D. Burns, PhD? Well, when I think about that, it's an interesting question. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not sure what that question means. What it means to be Lawrence D. Burns, PhD. Maybe we're going to have to start again. It's an unusual question. I'm not sure what you're reaching for.
Okay. We can just splice it, so we'll just jump right in from beginning. But right here.
What are you looking for? You want me to give my background or?
Yeah, basically just your background. Just an introduction from your end.
Maybe you can reword that. Could you give us a little bit of background? I'd be happy to share it that way.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we'll just jump right in. I'll reread the entire question. But yeah. Okay. 3, 2, 1. So my colleague and I have spent a few hours digging into your website, lawrencedburns.org, and your publication, Autonomy, the Quest to Build the Driverless Car, and how it will reshape our world. But from your perspective, what does it mean to be Lawrence D. Burns, PhD? Give us an introduction so we get to know who you are.
Okay, that's great. Well, I was actually born in Pontiac, Michigan, which is right in the heart of the United States capital of auto industry. Pontiac is the name of one of our brands from General Motors from years back. I went to a high school called Waterford Kettering High School that was actually named after the first research and development vice president at General Motors, which was a position that I ultimately took at GM, which is somewhat ironic. The irony goes even further. I went to a school called General Motors Institute, which was a co-op engineering school, which later changed its name to Kettering University. So here's this name in my high school, this name in my university, who was the founder of GM Research and Development. And lo and behold, my career at General Motors ended up where I became the vice president of research and development. I had a chance to lead that activity for the largest auto company in the world at the time. And, when you grow up in Southeast Michigan, the tendency is for everybody to want to be a so-called car guy or to have gasoline in your veins. And it was all about how fast your car could go or how much noise it could make. That never really resonated with me, to be honest. I never really saw myself as a car guy. I was much more fascinated in transportation. I think much like your group, I sensed transportation was really an important part of people's lives that are really enabled people to realize their full potential. And certainly if you don't have good transportation, you're at risk of being locked in a cycle of poverty. So I was very interested in why automobiles were such a dominant way to get around, not why they made a lot of noise or went fast. So I went on in school, studied public policy at University of Michigan, then regained my senses and went back into engineering and went to University of California, Berkeley to get my doctoral degree in transportation engineering, but very much with a focus on the economics and policy aspects of transportation systems. And I hit upon a concept I call accessibility, which I think, again, is near and dear to your organization, because at the end of the day, I concluded automobiles were all about the freedom to go where you want to, when you want to, doing what you need to do, traveling with the people that you want to travel with. And that freedom was extremely enabling because it allowed you to have access to jobs, access to schools, access to religion, access to goods. And geez, people who didn't have that were very much disadvantaged in the US economy. And so I've had this passion for this concept of accessibility for a long time. And while at General Motors, head of R&D, my boss, who was the chairman and CEO of General Motors, his name was Rick Wagner, he asked me a pretty important question when I took that job. He said, if you're going to reinvent the automobile today, knowing what we know about the issues associated with the car and about the technology that exists today rather than 100 years ago, what would you do differently? And that was a remarkable question. That enabled me to finally act on my passion to rethink transportation very much with an eye on accessibility, because I think one of the serious ramifications of automobile transportation is if you have one, great. If you don't, you're really disadvantaged. And so that set me down a path of rethinking the DNA of the automobile, focusing on the serious side effects, climate change, car fatalities, dependence on oil, inequality of access, and seeing if we could come up with a better way to do this. And so I guess if I'm defining Lawrence D. Burns, PhD, it would be that journey from this kid born in Pontiac, Michigan, going to two schools named after a laboratory, which he eventually had a chance to lead, and then having a boss that gave me the freedom to really put my time into thinking about a much different solution than the traditional automobile.
Wow,
awesome.
that's amazing. It seems like gasoline or the Detroit City Motor Town culture was just pumping through your veins from day one, which is amazing to hear. I think Harika will continue.
Out of your many roles that you have served in, including professor, business advisor, and engineer, one that is truly fascinating was your position at GM through the period of the financial recession of 2008. So during your time in GM, what were some of your responsibilities and proudest achievements as research and development chief?
Yeah, that was a very exciting time. I became head of R&D in 1998. And the job I had at that time, before I was named vice president of R&D, was head of planning worldwide for General Motors. Now, planning is what are the cars and trucks of the future that we're going to bring out, the business plan, the strategic plan, our manufacturing capacity, and the overall business plan underlying all of that. It was a very exciting job because GM was doing business in over 80 countries around the world. And I was traveling to 20 to 25 countries a year in that capacity. It certainly would be hard to plan the market for Chile sitting in Detroit, Michigan. You need to go there and you need to see it. So I love this job. And my boss says, hey, I want you to be vice president of R&D. And I said, well, I like what I'm doing. And he said, well, you get to keep that as well. So actually my job from 1998 to 2009, when I left General Motors, was R&D and planning. And we had a very exciting opportunity to answer that question that my boss asked me, what would we do differently if we were reinventing the automobile? And at the 2002 Detroit International Auto Show, we were able to show the answer to my boss's question with a concept called autonomy. And this was really interesting. It was a skateboard-like platform that the body of the car would sit on. And in each corner was a wheel motor, and it was an electric vehicle. And it was envisioned to run either on batteries or hydrogen fuel cells. And it had a really exciting reaction. And in fact, that platform concept became the forerunner to what people call skateboard chassis or skateboard platforms today. After that event, we got talking about what comes next in terms of big ideas. And at that time, my thinking was I'd like to see us develop cars that wouldn't crash. 1.2 million people a year were dying on the world's roadways. That was epidemic in scale. And we felt the technology was getting close to avoid crashes. In fact, I can remember being in Japan, in Tokyo, at a really busy subway station. And trains were coming in from all these different directions, and people were getting off the trains and crisscrossing and changing trains, and they weren't running into each other. And I got thinking, my goodness, if this large number of people can swarm together and not run into each other, why do we accept cars running into each other? So we started working on cars that don't crash. And lo and behold, that led to maybe cars that could drive themselves, and the autonomous vehicle challenge. So in 2007, the fall of 2007, General Motors had sponsored an entry in a race called the DARPA Urban Challenge. DARPA stands for Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And the challenge was a $2 million prize if you could compete and win on a 60-mile course and do the whole thing totally autonomously. No remote control, no one in the vehicle. And 80 teams entered the race, 35 built vehicles, 14 made it to the finals for the race day. And our car, GM-sponsored car with Carnegie Mellon, won that. And so here I had this chance to show the world this skateboard concept for an electric vehicle with a totally different design DNA, and then bring into that the whole thought process of what if a car could drive itself. Then I started thinking about how would you design these machines if they were electric on a skateboard without a driver. And it just started to explode what might be possible. You know, both of you are a lot younger than me, but if you took the journey from a wall phone and a separate device called the camera, and a separate device called a flashlight, and a separate device called a calculator, and a separate device called a calendar, and you started piling up all this stuff that has now become integrated into, where did that thing go? Into this. You begin to absolutely appreciate what transitioning from mechanical devices, what the car was, it was a mechanical machine based on combustion engines, to electrical devices. And then you bring the full creative capability of the world on digital technology. And all of that functionality is in this. Now think about how much less material is involved, how many fewer parts. And that's this epiphany that underlies my book, Autonomy. It was the realization that if we could pivot from human-driven to autonomous cars, from combustion vehicles to electric vehicles, if we could focus on the riding experience rather than the driving experience, if we could focus on cost per mile rather than the cost per vehicle, and if we could get the crash out of the system, we could make a profoundly better experience for people traveling around at radically lower cost and solve the societal challenges associated with cars and trucks. So that's sort of, I would say, if you're asking me what do I think some of my biggest accomplishments are, I would say it was connecting those dots. While I was at GM and then after I left GM and worked at Columbia University and worked at University of Michigan and advised companies, all of that thinking started to come together. Bit of a long response, but it's very, very relevant to the mission of your organization. Because one of the conclusions that I've reached is that if you have small 1 and 2 person electric pods that are autonomous and shared in communities, this is a different form of public transportation. It's not public mass transportation like buses and subways and light rail. It's public personalized transportation that you can get the cost very, very low. I think that's the key to acting on the mission that your organization has, to really get the cost low and to have shared fleets of very low cost but very capable vehicles that can move people around in communities and not have to own a car. So this is really important stuff, and pretty exciting to be able to be part of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's an incredible story right there. Because you truly have seen everything in the heart of the automotive industry from like decades in Motown, Detroit, all the way to right now Silicon Valley, which is the new hub of all electric, all autonomous, everything. So I guess from there we can kind of transition into your current role at Waymo. So Waymo is a self-driving company, as we know, but what would you say like differentiates Waymo as a company versus companies like Tesla and Rivian and so many more that are just turning out the production vehicle compared to Waymo?
That's a great question. Just a little bit of history on my involvement with Waymo. So we do this race called the DARPA Urban Challenge in the fall of 2007. And I mentioned we had sponsored the Carnegie Mellon team. There was another very, very capable team there from Stanford. It was headed up by a guy named Sebastian Thrun and the Stanford team. And then there were some other vehicles that did well. In fact, the head of DARPA, when we said, when is our next race? He said, there won't be another race. You guys have proven this is possible. So I thought we'd walk out of that in November 2007 and every company would begin investing in it and trying to make it real. And nobody did. It just went quiet for a while until 2009, when Larry Page and Sergey Brin concluded that maybe they truly could enable a car to drive itself. And they brought Sebastian in, and then he went and recruited the person I worked with closely at Carnegie Mellon, a guy named Chris Urmson. And they sort of identified about 13 other people to bring into this small team at Google to quietly begin learning how to create a car that drives itself. The fact that Larry and Sergey stepped up and did this, in my mind, pulled this whole agenda ahead by a decade. And if I'm right in that conclusion, it may be even more that they pulled it ahead, because the auto companies were not inclined to disrupt themselves. They weren't inclined to run with this naturally. It had to take Silicon Valley and a tech company to step up. So if 1.2 million people a year are dying on the world's roadways and they pull the agenda ahead a decade, that's 12 million lives that I think they could clearly look back and say they helped save 12 million people just by doing this. So that's what I call leadership. Now, Google at that time, so this was in 2010, 2011, I joined them as an advisor in very late 2010, early 2011. I mean, they, without question, were leading the world with mapping technology. They were leading the world with massive servers and the capability there. And they subsequently have deep understanding of AI and machine learning, enormous simulation capabilities, and certainly deep pockets given the wealth of the company. And they set out to truly do a fully autonomous car. Waymo believes it's just too hard to regain someone's attention and ask them to take over the driving when needed. So they reached the conclusion that it's all in, no driver in the loop. So I think that differentiates Waymo significantly from Tesla, where Tesla's trying to perfect driverless cars by having their customers use a feature called autopilot and hope that the customers pay enough attention to take over when they're needed. And they're getting a lot of data from that, an awful lot of data from that. But Waymo would argue that that situation awareness challenge is a tougher challenge than perfecting autonomous vehicles. So I say that's a distinct difference. Waymo sees themselves as the world's safest driver. That's what they're trying to do, create the most experienced driver, the safest driver in the world, and then make that capability available to anyone who wants to provide a driving service through their product. You can imagine a car company Waymo inside as the driver, or you can imagine a rideshare company like an Uber or Lyft with Waymo as their driver, or a trucking company doing that. There's a lot of good companies out there chasing this prize. It's not just Waymo. Waymo certainly is one of the leaders, if not the leader overall. But there's also a lot of other good companies working hard, not just in the United States, but around the world. I think Baidu just announced in China that they've gone commercial with a small fleet of vehicles in Beijing that are operating totally autonomously now. It's in a 3 square kilometer part of Beijing. So this is not just a US-centric story by any means.
Awesome. So we're gonna, before we continue into the second half of the podcast, we're gonna jump into a quick speed round of some fun questions. So you've mentioned autonomous vehicles multiple times already. How comfortable would you think that you are falling asleep in one?
I have.
That's the fun story right there.
Through my role at Waymo, now there was another person in the vehicle, so I'm being a bit flippant. Let me tell you about my first ride that was not on a controlled site. So what had happened is we have this DARPA Urban Challenge in 2007. GM's going through bankruptcy, and so it was a pretty tough time for us. And I'm in the process of leaving GM in the fall of 2009. And I started to lose track a little bit of where my friend Chris Urmstead and some of my other friends from the DARPA Challenge had headed after that race. And then in the fall of 2010, I get a phone call out of the blue from Urmson saying, "Hey, Larry, would you be willing to talk to a New York Times reporter?" I said, "Well, what's going on, Chris?" He said, "Well, you may not be aware, but I've joined Google Self-Driving Cars along with the 14 other people. And we've taken 13 Priuses and have equipped them with our software and hardware. And we've been operating them on public roads with test drivers in the vehicle. And the New York Times has sniffed this out, and they want to write a story and reveal what we're doing. And we need somebody from the auto industry that can speak with credibility why this is a good thing to be doing." I said, "I'd be happy to speak to the reporter if I can come out and ride in your car." So I was in Michigan, so I flew out to California and getting this Prius. I'm in the driver's seat, and I've got an engineer in the front passenger seat and an engineer in the back seat. And they say, "Okay, drive this vehicle to US 101. That's a major corridor down the San Francisco Peninsula. And then get in the freeway lane. And when you're ready, hit that engage button and the car will drive itself. You can take your hands off the steering wheel, your feet off the brakes and accelerator." And keep in mind, this is late 2010. And we're 11 years past that now, 10 and a half years past that. There's also this big red panic button in the console between the two seats. If anything goes wrong, hit that panic button. So for the first few minutes, my hands are shaking over the wheel, my feet are shaking. I'm going, "Oh man, I don't know about this." But honestly, within a few minutes, it began to feel very natural. The car was steering with precision. The car even nudged over a little bit to the left as a big truck passed me on the right. The car even backed off on its speed a little bit as a Volkswagen Beetle cut in front of me. And I realized this vehicle was driving very well. And I really started to become very relaxed and comfortable with the experience. And since then, I've ridden in these vehicles many, many, many times under a wide range of different conditions. And it's absolutely remarkable what they can do. So I think our biggest challenge really right now is that consumer understanding. So podcasts like yours will help with this. Not many people have had a chance to ride in a truly autonomous car. So their impressions could be shaped by others who would just soon not see these cars come true, who might not want to see an autonomous electric vehicle happen. Oil companies, insurance companies, um, companies that employ drivers, those kinds of things. So there'll be a lot of people out there trying to create an image of what this is that's different than what it actually is. So one of my concerns is premature judgment on what's going on here. As long as we are allowed to continue to learn on public roads, which the regulators have been very good about, the engineers will get these final remaining challenges sorted out, and people will then quickly become comfortable riding in an autonomous car. It's an amazing experience. It's like
Yeah,
it's like having eagle eye vision with eyes in the back of your head. You never get distracted. You never drive impaired. You never get tired. And it just has remarkable sensing capability with great redundancy baked into it. Safety is going to be the safety leader will be the market leader. The market leader will be the safety leader, and that's exactly how it should be. And consumers should have the confidence that this is how it played out.
yeah, definitely. I mean, the technology that these companies have built has been absolutely insane to experience. And I even know from going to a autonomous car dealership or semi-autonomous car dealership, just sitting in a test drive, like it feels as it's like an entirely new technology. But like, as you said, it does bring questions to some people. Yes, there are corporations that can benefit from discouraging it, but additionally, like on just like the personal level, like my dad had test drove the car, but he was very uncomfortable with letting his hands off the steering wheel, which I guess will be a learning curve for basically anyone who ever tries one of these
Oh,
cars. But
oh, yeah.
yeah, it's just like it's almost crazy to me that say you or anyone was able to be comfortable within one test drive of a car. They were able to become comfortable with just letting the car take the wheel, which is amazing. And I think it really shows how great that technology is, that it's that trustable.
Yeah, it is. It's not, I'm not saying it's not fail proof. I don't think it ever will be. But we can get the data that convinces us it's safer than human drivers. So that 1.2 million fatalities a year, the traffic safety experts claim that over 90% of those fatalities are due to human error. So it's us, the driver's the problem. And that exceeding the speed, driving impaired, driving distracted, all of those, driving in weather conditions where you shouldn't be driving, all of those things play into it. So a lot of people, I think, have concluded that driving is the distraction, because why else would they attempt to send a text while they're driving and steering with their knees at 70 miles an hour on an interstate in a 4,000-pound vehicle, if they didn't think that text was more important to send at that time than to drive safely. So driving has become the distraction. So why not, let's just get the driver out of the loop. We will get there. Engineers make what's possible real. That's what we do. And this is possible. And there's an enormous number of very capable engineers and computer scientists and others working hard to make it real. And you might say, why are they so motivated? Well, there's great societal benefits. It's going to be a real major enabler of getting the car out of the climate change debate. It's going to be a huge enabler of saving lives. It's going to be a huge enabler of getting the car off of oil and all the geopolitical implications of that. It's going to set up systems where we no longer need 3 parking spaces per car in the United States, which is a very poor use of our land. It's going to enable equality of access, which is hugely important to the people you're serving through your organization. But beyond that, there's a lot of money to be made here. The work we did at Columbia University indicates that the typical out-of-pocket cost of owning and operating a car, that's depreciation, fuel, parking, maintenance, finance, those kinds of cost factors, it's around 70, 75 cents a mile. And the time cost for a median income person, a person that makes the 50th percentile income, is about another 75 cents. So it's $1.50 a mile to own and operate a car. We think the kind of system that we envision, a tailor designed 2-person electric pod that will probably cost on the order of $5,000 to $7,000, then put an autonomous driver in it and put it in communities and have them be shared. We think we can get that down to lower than 20 cents a mile, from $1.50. Americans drive 2 or 3 trillion miles a year. So that difference of $1.50 and 20 cents is $1.30 times 3 trillion. That's a $4 trillion a year disruption. So where's that savings going to go? Some of it will go to you as consumers. A lot of it's going to go into the pockets of the shareholders who've invested in the companies that are creating this future. And that's what's driving this huge opportunity. And most of that savings is just eliminating waste. It's the wasted energy, it's the wasted land, it's the wasted capital, it's the wasted lives, it's the wasted repairs because the crashes go away, and on it goes. And I think that's an important message for the people listening in. For me, sustainability is first and foremost about just getting rid of waste. Einstein said the best design is the simplest one that works. An electric vehicle will probably have half as many parts on it as a combustion vehicle. Then you're going to reduce that part count even more when you take the driver out of the system. No steering wheel, no brake pedal, no gas pedal, no gauges, all of that stuff. And that is wasteful to have more parts than you need. Now, the downside of this waste elimination is you need fewer people to build cars. So a lot of people who listen to this discussion on autonomous cars get concerned justifiably about the truck driver who may not be needed, or the Uber driver, or the taxi driver, or the bus driver. the bigger jobs impact is going to be far fewer parts need to be designed, engineered, sourced, and manufactured and assembled. You're going to need far fewer engineers and purchasing representatives and others to do that work. But that's sustainability, to be honest. That's what we really need to understand when we want a sustainable future. It's about really getting rid of waste and wasteful designs. I'm hoping you guys want to be engineers now that I'm giving you this speech, because that's what you're going to get to do.
So earlier you brought up a story about racing. We were wondering if you ever considered being in a race or ever been in a race at all.
A driving race?
Yeah.
No, I never considered being a racer. I've skied race, snow skiing, but no, I never really felt that way. I've had a chance to drive cars fast. Being an engineer at General Motors, we would do a lot of development work at our proving ground, which is a very safe setting with the test tracks and everything properly designed. And if you're going to be an engineer doing any of that work, they put you through some very sophisticated advanced driver's training, doing some things that you wouldn't normally do in driving. But no, I'm being honest, very upfront in my book about this. I'm not what you call a typical car guy. I'm really what you would call an accessibility person. I really think transportation first and foremost is about allowing people to have the freedom to go where they want to, when they want to, and do that in a sustainable way, do that in a fair way where everybody can participate in those freedoms so they can realize their full potential. And you know this because of your organization. We have way, way, way too many people trapped in a cycle of poverty, in part because the transportation system is not serving them. My home city, Detroit, Pontiac was a suburb of Detroit, so I view Detroit as my primary home city. Car insurance rates for people who live in the city are just beyond reach for many of the people who live in the city. And then the city doesn't have grocery stores the way we have in the suburbs. So you've got groups of people who can't afford a car, they can't get to their job, and they don't have grocery stores located in their communities. They can't get to healthy food or medical facilities. We've got to break that cycle. So Wheels for All is a great way to do that. But my exciting message to our organization is the technology is converging. Autonomous electric vehicles, tailored, designed, and shared with the right systems, they're converging, and there are a whole lot of new ways to solve this problem compared to the way people were trying to solve it in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
Awesome.
Yeah,
So,
don't give up on bicycles either. I mean, they're a real important part of it. But no, I'm not a race car driver.
so climate change has finally taken center stage in public discussion, but now has become the media. Oh, let me start over. I'm so sorry. Climate change has finally taken center stage in public discussion, but now has become a political issue in the eyes of the media. What can we do as community members to work towards slowing down this larger than life issue?
To slow down I'm going to have to repeat that one more time. Just say it a little bit slower, please. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So climate change has finally taken center stage in the public discussion, but now has become a political issue in the eyes of the media. What can we do as community members to work towards slowing down this larger than life issue?
Oh, you're saying slowing down climate change?
Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, help people understand that it's real. There's an awful lot of information out there to suggest that it's a hoax. It's not. There's just way too many clear indicators that something different is going on here. Secondly, even if there's a chance that it's real, probability that it's real, the implications for everybody are so big that you have to address it. So sort of like COVID. Some people don't believe COVID is real, but even if you have an inclination that maybe it is, maybe you should get that vaccine just on the outside chance that you might get COVID. And if you did get it, you might be one of the ones that get really sick from it. So we've got to view climate change in a similar way. Secondly, we're out of time. Each year that goes by where we don't move as fast as we possibly can to address this challenge makes the problem worse. Third, we do have to prepare to mitigate the implications of climate change. It's gone on long enough now, such that coastal cities and certain regions are going to be impacted with changes in weather patterns, and we're going to have to be able to adapt to what's going on. I think another message is that the technologies are either here or they're coming very fast to get us off of fossil fuels. Keep in mind, fossil fuels are not the only source of CO2. The fact that some nations have diets that are meat intensive, and the way in which we feed the cows and the way in which the cows digest the food and the emissions from that process can be very problematic. The cement manufacturing makes a lot of CO2. So there's a whole lot of other sectors of the economy than just transportation and, that are in play here. Next, I would really understand and appreciate how impressive the cost reduction has been on solar energy. Grid scale solar, some very important news coming out of the Middle East in terms of where they intend to price some of their grid scale systems, even in the US and New Mexico. We're talking about very low cost per kilowatt hour. So solar and wind are definitely in play. I wouldn't close the book on nuclear because it also is a CO2 source of energy. So you get a sense from me, I'm an optimistic technologist. I absolutely believe through science and technology and good engineering work, we can solve this problem. The technologies exist. Now it's a matter of getting a collective will to transition the economy to these new opportunities. Collective will comes from common understanding. So the more you and your team can help others understand what the issue is and what are the opportunities to address it and even make lives even better, that's pretty exciting. The moment for me on this whole subject in transportation that really was my so-called epiphany, my moment when, oh my gosh, I finally get it. It was the realization that you could take the car out of the energy, environment, and safety debate and deliver an even better product at a lower cost. That's going to scale. A better experience at a lower cost that happens to not have emissions, that happens to rely on renewable sources of energy, that happens to not crash. That told me we're there. Now it's just a matter of getting it communicated, getting the learning cycles in place, and this thing's going to scale up. Anything short of that isn't scalable. You're not going to scale a product that costs more. You're not going to scale a product that doesn't address these side effects. And you're not going to scale a product that doesn't deliver the value proposition that people are used to. I think we're there in transportation. It's just, that's why I wrote this book. Again, common understanding leads to collective will, and collective will leads to transformational change. And so I wrote the book Autonomy, honestly, for people in your age cohort, so that you could get a much better understanding of what's coming and be much better prepared career-wise and advocacy-wise to accelerate this change.
Yeah, definitely. That's absolutely fascinating. I mean, there's so much progress that we get to see, which is absolutely incredible in all the industries you mentioned. It's great to see that the next generation or even millennials who are, I guess, in between both of us, they're definitely driving towards helping people however they can, and they're doing that through a path of affordability, accessibility, and just overall care for the environment, which is at least as a Gen X or whatever generation we have called for us, it's great to see that we do have a future on Earth, even though, say, SpaceX or Blue Origin are trying to go to Mars to start civilization. It's great to see that people are still here caring about what we can do as community members on Earth as part of the global community. But yeah, so I think the next thing that we really found interesting when looking into you was we discovered that you had been a professor at UMich and a department head at Columbia University for a few years. So for people like me and Harika and so many other students, what advice would you give them to navigating college and pursuing their dream careers, or even getting a glimpse of a career similar to yours?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, let me share with you my definition of career success. And it's pretty simple. It's waking up every morning really excited about what you get to do. Nothing else matters, the amount of money you make or any or prestige or anything. It's just simply waking up saying, I'm excited to get to work and be able to pursue my passion. So make sure whatever you decide to pursue in college, and by the way, a lot of freshmen change their majors, a lot of sophomores change their majors. That's a natural part of finding your passion. But make sure you don't go down a path where you're maybe wondering, do I really enjoy this? Because you're going to spend a lot of time doing it. And it's really, really hard to do your best at something that you're not passionate about. So you've got to find your passion. Secondly, your education is not a destination. It's not about, I'm going to get my college degree and I can put my books away and I can move on. Especially with your generation, it's going to be lifelong learning. So learn how to learn. Really, really focus on that. And it's interesting, as an engineer in engineering school, you're taught engineering principles, and then you're tested where the professor will ask you a question, give you some data, and expect you to apply the data to the question and come up with one right answer. The reality of the world is the questions are very poorly defined. The data are very messy. The methods never apply perfectly, and there's oftentimes more than one right answer. And it took me a little while to realize that because I was really good at getting the right answer as an engineering student. But then when I got into the business world, I began to realize all this ambiguity is out there. But never, ever, ever put your textbooks away. What you've learned and learning how to learn is extremely important. I think your generation is much less likely to be working for one company for 30 or 40 years the way I did it with General Motors. I think you're going to want to be your own free agent, be able to control your own destiny, so that when some big shocks hit the system, you don't necessarily have the rug pulled out from under you entirely. I have daughters who are 33 and 30, and work hard counseling them to make sure that they have the capability to be on their own if they need to. And, they've had their journeys finding their passions. One of them is a research chef with a communications degree and is very fascinated by the future of food. The other one is a marketing manager for a new town in Florida, north of Fort Myers, called Babcock Ranch. And it's pretty exciting stuff. I wish I was your age again, but only if I knew what I know, and have already gotten the scars, because I've made a lot of mistakes. I failed a whole lot too. Don't be afraid to fail. It's all about having that perseverance, the ability to get back up. In my book, I talk about a moment in my life where I lost my hearing and I lived a year with no hearing, and my company GM stood behind me and enabled me to continue to do my job. I finally got this cochlear implant, allows me to function with the two of you the way we are today. But life's going to have setbacks. You better know how to get up and jump back in and keep going. That's just the nature of life. I think it was John Lennon that says, living's what happens while you're making plans. So make sure you live. Don't just dial in on a plan and be obsessed with what the future's bringing. Make sure you live in that moment. Really, really important. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that because, well, if not me, then most of my friends put a lot of pressure on themselves, especially during this time because we're like just about to go to college and everybody has to decide their degrees and whatnot. And nobody wants to fail or nobody wants to be the dropout or just nobody wants to, like, if their reputation is very important.
Yeah. You know, there are so many good engineering undergraduate schools out there. And yeah, I lived through the processes of my daughters selecting universities. One went to a small liberal arts college in Michigan called Kalamazoo College because they had a great international studies program. And the other one went to DePaul in Chicago. She wanted to live in a city. She hadn't lived in the city. But through that process and through my own experience, you can get a great undergraduate education at hundreds and hundreds of universities if you apply yourself. There are a lot of good educational programs at a lot of universities around the nation and around the world for that matter. If you're going to graduate school, I think the degree pedigree means a little bit more. You know, having an MBA from Harvard is different than having an MBA from, say, a state school necessarily. So you might want to be a little bit more selective. Also, if you wanted to go off to graduate school, I strongly encourage people to work for a while before they do that. It's a big commitment of time and money, and you better make sure that that next part of your education really fits with your learnings and your objectives. Now, I went on right afterwards, but I was a co-op engineering student, so I had worked 6 weeks when school 6 weeks, worked 6 weeks when school 6 weeks for 4 years. So I had a pretty good feel for what engineers do by the time I graduated. But I wouldn't get overly obsessed or lose any sleep if you got into your second choice or third choice university. You are going to do well there, and you're going to get a good education there. And so don't worry too much about that process. You're all going to find good schools, and you got to apply yourself though. You really do.
Well, that's all for today. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, follow us on Instagram at Wheels for All and check out our website at wheelsforall.org. Thank you so much for joining us today on Roll On Today, Mr. Burns. If you want to learn anything more about Mr. Burns, you can check out his website at lawrencedburns.org. Anything else you'd like to add?
I just want to end on one last point. We talked a bit about this concept of accessibility in the form of transportation, go where you want, when you want. But this is an accessibility device as well. It gives you access to information and access to knowledge and access to friends. And as you work on your mission of bringing Wheels for All and make sure you're also focusing on those other dimensions of accessibility, because of those, I ask my kids frequently, would they rather give up their cell phone or give up their car? And they would give up their car before they would their cell phone, because this is such a powerful accessibility tool. And the pandemic has put a few megatrends on steroids: work from home, online learning, telehealth, e-commerce, those kinds of things. And I think our accessibility systems beyond transportation, our accessibility to jobs, our accessibility to health and goods are going to change radically over the next 10 years. So as you think through your purpose, Wheels for All, I don't want to get you off your agenda because it's a very, very important purpose that you're pursuing. Look at how all these accessibility systems are changing, and make sure it's access that you're dialing in on for people who can't break out of cycles of poverty for lack of access for whatever reason. It's going to be an exciting 10 years.
Well, it was great having you. See you all next time. This is Harika and Soham signing off.